Sustainability, whose line is it anyway? Not quite sure where that came from, probably betrays my age too. And it's really around, for me, everybody grabbing at this thing. And it's a bit like a balloon, one of those balloons that you blow up and then you start to fill with water. And you've got civil society grabbing at it, and it sort of squirts off in a direction, and the retailers come and grab at it, or in fact they pinch it, don't they? And government maybe pinches at it a little bit, because definitely civil society are doing all the grabbing and the retailers are doing a little bit of pinching. Government can only afford to pinch, and then civil society keeps grabbing, and this balloon keeps folding away, and then the consumers get hold of it and it bursts. That's it, that's my talk. So I'm going to talk briefly about something that you probably know as much, if not lots more than I do about, so I'm not going to go into the challenges of sustainability in any great detail. I'm going to present to you some pretty simple thoughts about the shape of the food industry and where I think it needs to move. And then I'm going to get to the main focus, because with all of your thinkers, no doubt, there's lots of things we would like to talk about, but I'm going to try and stick to the brief and focus on a couple of case studies where the light is really shining on what consumers actually do, as opposed to what the various stakeholders who are concerned to varying degrees about this assume. And then I'll wrap it up at the end. There are lots of slides, but many of them have got pictures on just to keep us awake and stuff, so hopefully you won't be completely dizzy by the end, and we'll have plenty of time for discussion. And I'm always reminded to tell people what it is you're going to say before you say it, and then remind them what you said at the end. I haven't got this slide at the end, but I am conscious that it's now 4:15 and you've had a hard day, and there will be several slides into this, and you'll wonder why on earth you came instead of going to the gym or going home. So let's get the key bits first, and you might even just reflect on some of these points while I then go into some of the thinking, rational examples to support them. So when I sat at my desk thinking, so what do I really want to say today? These are the four things that came out. The first one is, so I'm just reflecting here on the different groups, stakeholders, people that are looking at this question of sustainability that preoccupies most, if not all of us in this room, because we care a lot about it, or we're paid to sort it out. So the first bullet point is trying, and I nearly always have to translate what I say, perhaps that's just an academic weakness, is that from my perspective, and it is just my perspective, I don't claim to have the truth, just a perspective, the majority expect the food chain to be sustainable, but actually don't care very much about it. They are oblivious to what's going on. The majority, I think the vast majority of people on the planet, certainly in this country, don't care anything like as much as we think they should, or many of us assume that they do. So I'm calling them the oblivious. They just assume that either Tesco will fix it, or the government will fix it, or but someone else will fix it. It's not their problem. So all that's kind of, all of that oblivious to this stuff, because we've got many more important things to do, darling, haven't we, than worry about the food industry. Then there are the few, I think, and this might describe most of us in this room. I better say us as opposed to you, otherwise you're getting up on me. And that's those for whom sustainability is an aspiration, that we seek this outcome and we are working diligently to achieve this. And I've called them rather meanly perhaps, but I think there's a zealousness about this. We must fix this, and we're going to fix this, and why can't these people see what they're doing, these selfish bastards, or these ignorant fools, or these giants who abuse their power. So I think there are, and I suspect many of you are doing that often, from one day and week to the next when these things don't work. And then the kind of the light bulb for me is, and the reality is, I believe, and most of the time my glass half full, but I believe that we are light years away from achieving this because of the fact that the majority don't really care very much, and we've got some zealous enthusiasts that want to stop us in our tracks and change our behaviour by following their lead, which turns the majority even further away from doing what we want them to do. So That's that first bullet point. Second one then is, I think, and I've tweaked this from a presentation that I give around sustainable competitive advantage, because I dabble in policy only when I'm asked to. I'm not a policy analyst. I don't design policy. I spend very little time with government or government agencies for a variety of reasons, as I'm sure you'll work out. But from a business perspective, they can't ignore the fact that they're involved in this process and this complexity. And I think that the reference to joined upness translates from within business to policy to civil society. So I think making food chains sustainable requires grandly, because this is a grand event, a paradigm shift. There was a question mark, or there was a question mark on my original list. So it's for you to decide whether it constitutes a paradigm shift. But I think what we've got is an industry. I was reflecting on this at the beginning in the blog. For 20 odd years now, Tim and I have been looking at this industry. I can't remember it being so dysfunctional. So I've been looking at supply chain relationships for 25 odd years around the world, up and down the food chain, from input supply companies right the way through primary production, manufacturing, retailing and distribution. And the really weird thing is that information is ubiquitous, technological solutions do exist, but there are too many vested interests in not knowing what's happening. There are far too many people who don't want to reveal the truth, and so we're still faced with companies fundamentally driven by short-term opportunism and policies that I think, for a variety of reasons, are compliance-orientated, which means you just get a minimalist compliance with what the law requires us to do, which is always a bit like the MOT. Your car can still kill people, but it's got brakes that stop you in time if you choose to, or you're able to press the pedal. And I think what we need to do is to get the industry, and with that government and civil society too, to think much more holistically. And I know it's a word that we all use, and maybe I'm preaching to the converted here, and making it happen is much more difficult than it is to say. So a much more strategic orientation around business process integration as well as stakeholder integration, where we build much more resilience, because this is not a resilient industry whatsoever. And that's why many of us do get worried at night or get angry, because we see just how fragile this industry is, and one in which co-regulation is much more of the model, rather than one where the carrot is occasionally wielded to oppose the stick that the state all too often beats us with when it's too late. So this means, I think, business leaders and policymakers need to change the way they think, which, as Homer Simpson tells us, is not what we like to do. If it's difficult, why would you? The way they allocate resources, which is also difficult, particularly when you're in power and have those budgets slashed, and the way we incentivize people through contracts, for example, in order to change the collective behavior of the food chain. So back to civil society and different stakeholders and the consumers who don't care. If we focus on consumers to lead us out of the promised land, and I can remember many debates with Tara Garnett where I argued fiercely that get out of the way and let consumers lead us through. And I've given up that view now. I really have. I fundamentally shifted my position to one where we cannot expect, it would be foolish, naive to expect consumers to lead us out of this mess. Everybody in the food chain needs to change their behaviour, and at the moment, everybody is pointing at somebody else. It suits the government to point at a retailer. It suits the consumers to point at a manufacturer. It suits the retailers to point at primary producers or other stakeholders. Nobody wants us to put their hands up and say, yep, we've got a stake in this, we're partly to blame, and this is what we're going to do about it. They'd rather blame somebody else than accept responsibility, which means we're stuck. Really stuck. And what a profound last bullet point the last one is, so nothing else you might remember not to believe a word that I say, but actions do speak louder than words, and my fundamental argument is that the vast bulk of academic research around consumer behaviour and sustainable consumption is based around what people claim they did last week, last month, last year, and what they will do or would do if. And I don't believe a word of that, having spent 15 years looking at data about what people actually do and having looked at things that are supposed to change that behaviour and seeing that nothing much has changed. And there could be all kinds of reasons why that's what I've discovered, because the research could be very, very poorly designed, as you would doubtless conclude. But that's one of the few things that I try and instill in my students. If you get lost in some of the other detail, I say, students, for goodness sake, challenge everything that everybody tries to drive into you and seek the evidence, which is clearly what we as researchers need to do. And we as researchers need to be much more honest when we're designing our research and publishing and promoting our research about its limitations. So the academics who claim to know everything are not helping our cause because we know so little. And the academics and our profession that's increasingly reductionist to write the poetry that nobody reads and that has no impact on civil society or policymakers, they're not helping us either. Government can and arguably is moving like a ruddy juggernaut in changing some of the incentives for academics as well as it is for everybody else in the chain. There you are. I've taken 6 or 7 minutes on that slide, so it'll be the longest slide that I spend time on, thankfully. But hopefully there are some stimulating, reassuring, controversial, or just obvious, hopefully not blindly obvious, takeaways, and you may well find one of your own. You've had enough about me. Big ears. Mum and Daddy gave me big ears. I've been very lucky. I'm a traveller, as you can see, pioneer. I've been very, very fortunate. Like Tim, what a wonderful privilege it's been to be an academic. Well, I still am, I guess, aren't I? Being an academic, travelling the world, working with people, big companies, little companies in faraway places, up and down the food chain. And my big ears have served me well because fundamentally I just try and listen to what people do. I ask them questions. I try and make sense out of the way businesses make decisions. I try and make sense out of how different stakeholders interact. And, like many of you, often can't work things out, but refuse to make assumptions. So very happy to recognise that I don't understand some things. Very happy to accept defeat. Very happy to accept that there are some issues that are way beyond my ken. But I've great fun travelling up and down the food chain for the last 25 or 30 years. Yep, I set up this centre at Kent, which is not that, and Tim has done most of this for me really. It's two areas. It's the value chain as opposed to the supply chain, and that's because it's really, from a pull consumer perspective, supply chains, traditionally at least, have been researched and taught from a push perspective. We make stuff and we push it around the world, and that's part of our problem. So the value chain fits very well with a better understanding of what consumers value. If you understand what the consumers value, you design products that they hopefully need, but at least certainly what they want, rather than simply trying to dispose of what it is that you can do. So we're doing lots of that, and the flagship product project to which Tim referred, so I thought I would flag this up in detail for those that this might be the only reason you're here, to find out about what we've been doing with the club card data. So it is an innovative project. So a dozen or so PhD students funded by the old levy boards, for those of you who can remember who the levy boards were. For those of you who can't, then you didn't miss very much. But these were sector bodies that had R&D budgets to fund knowledge about their sectors, and they funded PhD students to look at the biscuit consumer and the cheese consumer and the consumers in Scotland and Northern Ireland and other places. So a dozen or so PhD students, over £1 million worth of research funding later, and supporting over 600 small producers and farmers in helping them understand better what it is that consumers are doing, which products are selling, and whether they should make spaghetti flavoured ice cream or Loganberry ice cream from their herd of Frisian cows in Herefordshire that would supply Waitrose and 2 farmers markets. At least they might be informed about what it is that's going well and what they might do, rather than just guessing. Most farmers guess most of the time about most things and then blame everybody else for it going wrong. No farmers in the room, but I'm sure Tim will defend the farmers. I am the son of a pig farmer, but that doesn't stop me from criticising them as much as I defend the retailers, which most of you probably like to tackle. So if you're interested in finding out more about that stuff, which I'm not going to talk too much about because that's how we've worked with farmers and food producers over the last decade, Yep, it's 10 years this year that I've been working with Tesco on this data. This list goes on and on and on and on and on, and you can go to the website Who Buys My Food and download some of those, which you can read, over a cup of coffee if you want to find out how these businesses, small businesses, have used this insight to make better business decisions. Right. So, that would be a question, wouldn't it? How on earth do they get oilseed rape to grow in a place like that? I just love that photo. I don't quite know where it is, but I just think it's magical. And so there was a challenge that was overcome, assuming they could sell the stuff that they grew. This is the bit that I'm going to go quite quickly because you are experts in this. This is your reason for being. You wouldn't be here if you didn't know all about this stuff. So why would I waste too much time telling you about the state in which the food system is in? But I do have a pretty picture, or at least the pretty pictures will arrive in a moment, the purpose of which this slide I've used for such a long time, because what I do here, or what you can see, is the emergence of what I think is complexity. So these are issues which researchers, civil society, government agencies, corporations, trade associations, each one of these boxes could be exploded into smaller boxes for interrogation, for scrutiny, for intervention. And what you end up with is a mess, lots of colour, which I characterise as complexity, summarising the complexity of the food industry that we're working in, of course, and most of us, the reality is most of us are in this part of the challenge, because if we can't make enough money to pay the bills, then nothing else matters. But what you get there is a rich and hugely diverse picture of, massive, massive, massive challenges. And I, like Tim, talk to some of the people working in most of these areas. I understand not as much as Tim does about what they're doing, but I understand enough to get a sense of the complexity in each of these areas. And therefore the danger in not wanting to know more of the detail and not being obsessed with trying to join up the macro with the micro, and then within and between those segments, the issues that interact with each other. And that's that point really about civil society and arguably academics being so reductionist. The only way we can test our hypotheses is to make some assumptions and focus on this. Let's hold everything else constant and focus on the butterflies. Well, where does that get us? It gets us nowhere. It actually gets us nowhere. We can test something. If we did this, and this, then that would happen. But all that stuff's never going to happen. So why are we obsessed with that? And that's why, why do the retailers never show up at our conferences? They sit in the room, and it's true, they shake their heads at us. You fools, they say. We thought you were clever people. Why are you trapped with this self-obsessive, reductionist pins on the heads of that don't help us at all when we're trying to do things right? So if I say nothing else in defence of, I mustn't name the retailer, but retailers, is that I don't believe they are deliberately hell-bent on stuffing everything up. They're not. I don't believe they're bad people, all of them. They're not all incompetent. Not all of their systems are rubbish. But some of them are. And we all assume that Tesco and Sainsbury and Asda and Walmart and Nestle and Mars have all got all the information, they've got all the answers, but are busy planning and plotting the destruction of the planet to get their share of the pie. I think that's just cobblers. It suits us to paint these pictures, stereotyping, which serves no purpose at all. So, sustainable competitive advantage becomes sustainable food chains. Because I don't believe in collaboration for collaboration's sake. We will not collaborate with everybody. Not everybody in this room does. Not everyone in this room should. Not everyone in the food chain will. But the thing about collaborative resource allocation is you can get more stuff done. Yeah, and you don't have things duplicated So we get more out of the system by asking the question, what are we trying to achieve? Now let's decide who does what. And the reason that doesn't happen is because we don't trust people. End of. That's why manufacturer inspects the raw materials that they purchase from the cooperative that inspected them when they sent them. And that's why the retailer inspects the products that the manufacturer inspected before they sent them. Everybody checking on everybody else because nobody trusts anybody. Ridiculous, ridiculous, infantile. Infantile. We have the information. We can know exactly where stuff comes from, exactly what's going into it, exactly when it's going into it, and we have the science to know what that means. But it suits us to ignore it until we have to defend ourselves. When it's always, as policymakers or as businessmen or people, it's too late. So, I believe in collaborative resource allocation. I haven't published a single paper by myself, there you go, because I'm obviously a fool that needs for co-authors. But I practice what I preach in terms of my research, and it's so much more fun talking to people who have different languages to bring to the table. Yep. And that's about, in business terms, but equally in policy and civil society terms, the industry does need to add more value to deal with profitability. It needs to reduce its cost to deal with profitability. It needs to do that quicker than it ever has done before because the world is changing at a rate that they can't keep up with. But it can't do that at the expense of the environment, at the expense of society. And of course, relatively recently they've worked out that jeepers, if we pay attention to our carbon footprint and reduce the amount of energy, we can actually save money. There's a good reason for becoming much greener in our business. So there's some incentivization to reduce cost and add value if you can find those people that will pay more for it. But this is really, really hard to do. And what's interesting in our food, if you think about retail supply chains, is what really is interesting is that they've been pursuing a kind of what we in the business world refer to as a lean system. So they want food to be as cheap as chips, as cheap as it possibly can, because it's a very mature market, so they're stealing fractions of percentage points of market share by trying to make this cheap. But at the same time, and the only way you make things cheap is by knowing what you need to do and gearing up for making the right quantities of known demand. And at the same time, they very cleverly decide to promote the socks off everything, creating huge spikes in demand, huge amounts of uncertainty, which does not sit at all well with a system that's designed for efficiency. So these are not comfortable bedfellows. Being agile and efficient is really, really hard. So for it to be possible, you need to have smart organizations strategically aligned, sharing information with the appropriate process integration, with a regulator who's keeping a watchful eye and helping them whenever they can, not just whacking them over the head and saying run faster. And the other thing I feel like I must have learned, because there was a time when I'd say leave it to the market, is that don't leave it to the market, because markets are, after all, imperfect. And I can probably get away with that in this audience. Another audience would just be throwing rotten eggs or tomatoes at me. But economists place far too much faith in the market will work out. Equilibrium is just around the corner. But how big is that bend? A bit like Wycliffe Street. It took me 10 hours to find from the Farringdon station. It's never there, but it says on the map. Equilibrium is coming, but it's not there. Well, turn your bloody iPhone round then. So there you go. Sustainable food chains. I think these things are absolutely possible. They're absolutely desirable. The reality is, we need more stuff to feed more people. You can't keep telling people to stop having babies, and you can't tell people to eat fewer donuts because they'll just go to the gym. They'll find all kinds of reasons to ignore you. And all we do is to say, oh God, how can we stop the rate of population growth? And how can we stop people from eating the wrong foods? And that's the focus, yes. Well, get real, because it's not going to happen. So it won't happen just by wagging your fingers and saying, stop eating the donuts. So this is difficult, but often I think policymakers, and that's why I believe the majority of consumers kind of take it for granted. They assume this is very easy. And students won't have it when you tell them in a lecture that, all the principles you read about in the textbooks, forget them. Because in the reality, it doesn't work like that. Oh, well, what would he know? And then, of course, we all discover eventually that, yes, the real world is not very much like we would like it to be, or we assume it is. And you know all this stuff too. So although I like this diagram, I like building it up over time, I'm conscious that I will be in great danger of running out of it. So I'll get through this quite quickly, because I can't believe there isn't anybody in the room that isn't familiar with this diagram, which is where, in a sense, we're focusing on, with the case studies today, the whole challenge around the attitude, intention, behaviour gap. And I will say, I'll say things while I think of them in case I forget to say them at the end, that this applies to every link in the chain. So the retailer has to change their behaviour. Manufacturers have to change their behaviours. Primary producers jolly well have to change their behaviour and stop pointing the bloody finger at every other Tom, Dick and Harry and expect for a payout. And the consumer too. So this model applies to everybody in the food chain. We only choose to apply it to consumers. So I think that's a mistake, because we assume that everybody else will get it, or they've got some Machiavellian reason for not doing it. So we tend to focus all our efforts here as academics. Yeah, we focus on willingness to do something, attitudes towards something, concern for. Yes, I'm very concerned about. You try getting someone to confess that they don't buy fair trade food because, in truth, they don't care enough about poor farmers in Africa. You try stopping someone in Farringdon High Street and asking them, do you care about poor Africans? Oh, yeah, I do. And do you buy fair trade food? Of course I do, a lot. And yeah, they don't, for Christ's sake. Anyway, you know all that stuff. So, not in Farringdon anyway. So, this is necessary but not enough. We've got to do that stuff up there. So, we should be doing much more impact analysis on what do people actually do. And that's where, and of course that is difficult. It's really hard. And buying the evidence or creating the evidence costs a lot of money. So what do policymakers do? What do NGOs do? They say, we can't afford that. So we'll do something else instead. So we get some pretty average, or worse still, very, very unreliable evidence upon which to base our policies, our strategies, because we can't afford to find out what's really happening. And I don't accept that. That for me goes back to resource allocation. So what are you trying to achieve here? And who's doing the allocating of resources? How about you try sharing more? That's what we've done here. We've got the data out of Tesco to help their suppliers understand better what consumers do. And the students are doing that on Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays. And on Mondays and Fridays, they're doing their research into fair trade, into organics, into local, into the impact of X and the impact of Y. So that's undoubtedly some additionality there. We're looking after the customer and their suppliers whilst using the data for another purpose. So that's got to be, we've got to create this environment that makes it easier for everyone in the food chain to change, not just the consumer. So, and this now should start to give you a feel for where I'm coming from, if you can, hopefully you can, that the link with business, with marketing is clear. That if you're trying to close that gap, you need a clear message. What does marketing tell us? That you've got to understand who it is that you're trying to communicate with and give them the message in the appropriate language through the appropriate media. And what do? Single message, stop eating the donuts, or something similar, that the majority don't get. So a differentiated message, like a differentiated product range, is bloody hard work, costs you more to research and implement. So we won't do that, will we? We're all a bunch of... The world's full of Homer Simpsons. And then once you've worked that out, you've got to communicate it effectively. Oh, crikey, if I've got segmented messages, I've got different channels, and I've got my one provider, and now I've got to go through these other providers that I know nothing about and haven't got a budget for. So I won't do that, will I? But I still claim to be talking to everybody. I hope this resonates, or perhaps you just think I'm mad, and that's fine. And then you've got to deliver it consistently, which is where the supply chain comes in. There's no point salespeople, policymakers, retailers, brand managers, making promises that their colleagues in manufacturing, purchasing, distribution cannot keep. Happens all of the time. A salesperson will tell you anything. A politician will tell you anything. The head of a government agency will tell you anything that gets them out of that interview, that gets them off of the hook that they found themselves caught on, which is justifying irrational decision making, because most of it is with the lack of evidence. Here's one from dunnhumby. They use this to flog their data to people. Oh, crikey, I'm being televised. Yeah. So they use this to flog their data to clients. They've got 30,000 shoppers signing up to be asked questions. So they can look inside their shopping baskets. Interesting, Mrs. Jones, you didn't purchase that special offer we sent you. On the phone, Mrs. Jones, why didn't you do what we wanted you to do? Well, it's like this. Very, 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 very powerful. So not only can you see what that group are doing, 30,000 of the 17 million people that shop at Tesco and use their club card, we've got this subset that we can interrogate baskets and then ask them, what's going on in your basket? So what do they say? They said, this is one of their slides they use to make the point. It's a very sneaky product, isn't it? Because you've got Tesco Healthy Living. I'm sure I buy Tesco Healthy Living. You've got natural Greek yogurt. I'm sure I buy natural Greek yogurt. So there's lots of ways I could get this wrong. But of those people, the 30,000 that were asked, let's look in their basket, shall we? Only 1 in 4, did. For a number of reasons. So the majority didn't. That's a kind of, maybe a trivial, but it's a slide that I still use lots because it's, if you like, reality. But it's not just them, is it? You know, there's lots of studies in the past that have claimed the demand for organics is huge. We'd all buy more of it if we could, when the actual sales are far, 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 far lower, depending on how you want to measure it, than people claim. So good intentions going wrong everywhere. You know, the UK has gone madly ethical, hasn't it? Well, not. If you look at the actual share of fair trade products, the people that claim to be ethical shoppers, bears no resemblance to the number of products that are actually sold. And the US is the biggest market for ethical goods. Nothing like as large in reality. So I could go on, right? And you could counter, and no doubt you will if I get to the end quick enough. So the paradigm shift here is we've got to move away from the push model. This is my wine supply chain, having spent 18 wonderful months in South Australia, helping them get to grips with a declining market in the most important part of the world. So the UK is the single biggest market for Australian wine. Tesco is the single biggest customer in the world for Australian wine. And during that period when they were going through their drought, which is no bad thing because that meant they had less grapes to process into wine. You had the rise and the comeback of the old wines and the new wines from South America, and an incredibly dysfunctional wine supply chain. That's why I've got the wine supply chain. It's one of the longest, and it's a nice picture. They should be angry. I don't know why they're smiling. He's angry and working very hard. She looks pretty cheesed off, but the cartoon went a bit wrong there. But in the model that I think we're still fundamentally stuck in, this is my perception, and retailers and manufacturers in the room would say, you know nothing about the real world. Okay, I'm only giving you my perception, and this is my perception of the real world that I get from using these flappers and asking people questions and looking at what they do. Opportunistic trading relationships and lots of dysfunctional conflict. Conflict's good if you're grown up about it. We made a mistake here, things have gone wrong. Can we fix it, please? And there's a solution here, but who's going to pay for it? There's not many of those conversations going on at all. It's just this stuff. And then the bullies. But that's okay, because we've got an adjudicator that's there in the background to listen to those people say, I'm being kicked in the nuts, it hurts. No, sorry. Rubbish. No one's going to call foul, and if they do, so what? So weak information flowing, that's the transaction data. I sent this, no you didn't. It was late, no it wasn't. You owe me, no I don't. Awful. And it's cost plus. The wonderful thing about this is people buy stuff and it costs this much. They incur some cost moving it from what it was to what it is, and they call all of that adding value. It has no value if the consumer doesn't perceive it as such. Try telling farmers that they add no value in the eyes of a consumer. A farmer's job is to do exactly what it says on the tin. Take this genetic raw material and convert it in to a grain of wheat that might become a loaf of bread. Convert it to a cow that might become some milk. Just do what it says on the tin. It's necessary. Without farmers, there's no food. Back to the masses who don't give a hoot about sustainability. Oh, they're just farmers. There's plenty of them. Who cares about them? Whinging, moaning in their four-wheel drive. Blah, blah, blah. So much of our consumer research indicates the consumer sees no value in what the consumer does. And it doesn't help if you say, well, they're stupid then. We have to educate them then. It's not as simple as that. They don't perceive the value. It's just a necessary function. We could spend all day, weeks, years debating that point, but it's the part of this cost-plus business model. It costs this much to buy these wieners. I've spent this much growing them. I've added this much value, but you're only paying that much. You're screwing me. I'm going to tell teacher on you. Oh, well, that's because he's being screwed by, or she's being screwed by the retailer. Let's call foul on them. Well, no. Cauliflower's the best one. I was in Scotland a couple of months ago. Cauliflowers. Demand for cauliflowers is going like that. What do? Grow bigger ones. As demand falls, they grow bigger ones because they get paid by the kilo. And they wonder why they're going out of business. This is farmers for you. And so that compliance thing. So let's get some rubber on the wheels. Let's pull this system along. This is nirvana. And I think we are here. There's isolated examples of this everywhere in the world, which gives me, with my big ears, confidence that it can be done. But it's isolated pockets of collaborative innovation and co-regulation where we've got things going wrong, but we understand they will. And we're working hard, investing in all sorts of processes and technology to stop them from going wrong. We've got much, much richer information because we trust each other. So what do those consumers think? And why do they behave like that? And what do those customers in those markets really, really want? Why is retail different from food service? So attitudes and behaviours, not just invoices. And we're value adding, so it's outward facing, because we don't decide who adds the value, it's the customer. That's a hard one to accept. And then the co-regulatory framework, which makes business and government uneasy bedfellows. So government is uneasy about co-regulation because we'll be seen as selling our souls. And the alternative is to do what with a diminishing pot of regulatory funds to police the food chain with? Our FSA colleagues will tell us exactly what you do when your pot's being shrunk, risk-based, all that sort of stuff. Yes, good. That gets us so far. So the value chain thinking is holistic, it's process-orientated, because he's going to crash in a minute. It's cross-functional, which is the stuff about getting things lined up and the scrum working in the mud. And so what we get to is holistic, understanding the complexity, stop the assumptions about what is happening, what did happen, what will happen, and focus much more on the why. We don't do enough of the why. I would love to talk to you about the importance of these success factors, but there is no time. So I'm going to say nothing other than we have to understand each other. So the manufacturers need to understand the retailer. The manufacturers need to work with retailers and suppliers. Suppliers need to work with life science companies. And they all need to be much more informed about consumers. They can't be. Otherwise, they wouldn't all be trying to gain market share by making their food products cheaper. The blunt instrument of everybody, cut the price, which is, of course, our road to ruin. So you need to know where people are going so you can try and align with them or not. Choices help, otherwise you have none. If you haven't got any choice, then you're left with Tesco. And if you don't agree with them, well, what do? You comply with them. Then you're complying with them, you're complying with the government. You're certainly not optimising your resource allocation. Information can only be flowing if people have some remote trust for each other. I think that's the dysfunctionality, the fragmentation that continues, that despite the fact that information is ubiquitous, no one seems to have it, and if they have it, they're sharing it with no bugger. And it's awful, it's just ridiculous, infantile, pathetic, and I'm just a naive professor, so what will I know about the real world? So I am going to focus on consumer insight because I believe consumer insight is, so that should be A, not the, because clearly it's just one. It's a missing ingredient. So what I'm learning, and I've still got a long way to go, luckily, to learn lots more, is that there are massive differences in the way different people respond. We all have an interest in sustainability. And if you just look around us, we're all very different people. Different ages, different religions, different cultural backgrounds, different elements of this puzzle are we concerned with. And yet we could all be classified as being a group of people interested in sustainability. So why it should be so hard for government, business and civil society to get their heads around segmentation? And I think it's because they have the issue. They have the issue to force. We are forcing this issue, irrespective of who you are. And I'll come to organics in a minute as my favourite example. So there he is, Homer. Couldn't have a presentation without Homer. I think everyone needs this. The work that I've done over the last decade with big companies and little ones tells me they do not understand this stuff. Tesco's, the retailers are selling, 30,000 food products. They know where to put the car park. They know how to set a stall out. They don't know why people buy the brands that they buy. A buyer of biscuits is responsible for 200 lines working with 300 suppliers. How can they be expected to know why people... And he's moving from biscuits, or she, to dog food, having come from carrots. And we expect these people to be experts. They know that much about the why. They know what sells, because it goes off the shelf. They don't know why. And only half of the people supplying them do, because they have brands. The other half that supply Tesco's with Tesco's products assume the Tesco buyers know what they want. What do you want, Tesco? Right, there you go. And the buyer doesn't know what they want cheap stuff. So get cheap stuff, please. And it's like that. I mean, I am exaggerating to make the point, and I'm getting increasingly angry. So the more limited the resources, the more important it is to target. Luckily, some of these slides are really quite trivial. You wouldn't want to be facing him, would you? A bit like teeing up on a Sunday morning on the monthly medal when you haven't been down the driving range for about 3 months and your knees are shaking, it's going straight out of bounds, but that's just a bit embarrassing, but he's going to kill somebody. And of course that's what's happening in our food industry, for Christ's sake. We are, actually, aren't we? In the extreme, we're killing people. We're certainly killing societies, and we're killing species and causing havoc, which keeps people in the FSA in work, because we are hitting and hoping. We're hoping and not always hitting. So insight informs the value proposition. So what is the value proposition for the Ethics Council, the RSPB, Greenpeace, the FSA, Tesco, Sainsbury, the little farmer down the road? What is it? And quite clearly, I'm saying the masses are here, particularly in this country. We have a problem. We're not like the Europeans. Our food culture is pathetic. So many of our visitors, many of you in the room who are visiting, are shocked, disgusted at our pathetic food culture. And it is, for God's sake. It is pathetic. So, disinterested masses. We want people queuing up for organic food because of the right reasons, paying heaps more for it. Because if they expect to get loads more organic food at a fraction of the price, who the heck's going to grow that? How sustainable is that model? Insight can shift the conversations. If nothing else, suppliers will say to us, we never really understood that data, but when we took it out at the meeting with the buyer, they were stunned that we should be so knowledgeable about their shoppers. Because they'd spent the last 6 hours of that day fighting with people about the bills that were unpaid, the mistakes that were made. And here's a little farmer that says, we think these consumers in Herefordshire would like this kind of pack with this kind of fruit, and you can sell it at a premium. You'll make more money, and so will we. And the buyer thinks, jeepers, that's the first conversation today I've had that's like that. No bullying, no finger wagging. Let's give that a go. What a relief it is to have somebody, a little farmer, shed some insight into our shoppers when everybody else assumes, because they're your shoppers, you should know everything about them. Retailers know nothing like as much about shoppers as we assume that they do. And the organic industry is just away with the fairies, completely bonkers. I reckon 3/4 of consumers of organic food products don't give a stuff about the planet. They want their kids to go to grammar school. They want to be indulging their taste buds. They want to look beautiful and live longer. And that's what they expect. And what they get is the most boring, the boring stuff designed to save the planet, which, funnily enough, doesn't sell too well. And the retailer concludes, having done their market research with 1,000 shoppers, saying, if we cut the price of organics, would you buy more? Oh, yes. Solution, cut your prices, you fools. Do we really think the mother, organic baby food, biggest part of the baby food category. If we'd have said 25 years ago that barn eggs would be the biggest part of, we'd be told you're mad. Do mums really, and dads really care about missing the odd packet of crisps or pint of lager or Guinness so they can make sure their children survive? Because the conventional food, of course, is poisonous. That's what they believe. And of course, when you do fork out for those funny diddly fiddly Chantenay organic carrots, you can't wait for it. You tried it, I can tell. And you think, oh my God, I paid a fortune for those, like 80 pence, and it's rubbish. So you betrayed, broken promises. Oh, you get the point. So I think the organic industry have only themselves to blame. So finally, God, I'm okay. I think I'm okay. I'm okay, yeah. No, bottle. Yes, that's not whiskey. He was that mad bloke from the business school. All right, so the case studies. I could talk about lots, of course, but I did say I'd talk about these two, so I must do what I said I would do, otherwise I'd be in big trouble. So these are a couple of PhD projects, okay? So two of those projects funded by the Homegrown Cereals Authority, who were not the least bit interested in Fred's PhD that you researched. Not interested. He was busy. He was busy sorting. Yes, he was busy sorting out biscuits and bread, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, doing his research on fair trade choppers on Monday and Friday. What's wrong with that? Nothing at all. And DEFRA, funding a student to look at carbon labelling. So these two projects I'm going to talk about, I've put that on the screen because it's a really nice little project where Department of Health in West Midlands, which is the obesity capital of Europe. They asked us the question, could we use your Tesco data to help us solve obesity in Coventry? And I said, I doubt it, but we'll give us some money, we'll give it a try. But the point is, I have a report there that some of you might be interested in. What we did was we used the dunnhumby data, I'll just tell you this much. We used the dunnhumby data, and Tesco loved this, interestingly, when they discovered this. They loved what we did with it, which was to find out which store in the West Midlands had the highest penetration of bad food and the lowest penetration of good food. It was the Coventry Rico Arena store, and that's where we recruited our obese young mothers to participate in this research, which was, because they are the single biggest vulnerable group in that part of the country. And then there's a whole bunch of interventions around helping obese single parents come to terms with cooking for them and their children. It's a beautiful little study. That's one we haven't yet published. These other two have. If anyone's interested in the report that we sent to the Department of Health of West Midlands, you're more than welcome to ask me for it. Okay, these other two studies, because I have to start speeding up, I think I can go a little bit faster. You can read for yourself in greater detail. So I'm going to whiz through these two cases because you must get the gist of my story by now. And then if you find them interesting, you can read them in greater detail, of course, in your own time. So the first one, which is the carbon footprint stuff. So essentially, this is a study where we didn't set out to identify what, at the time, remember this is going back to 2008, 2009, so carbon labelling was in its infancy, Tesco were trialling it, it had its advocates, it had lots of adversaries from around the world who were quite worried that the pilot should work and their approach to carbon labelling would be dumbfounded. So we didn't set out with any agendas whatsoever, and the jury was out. You might say, everyone knows carbon labelling was stupid and it was bound to fail. Well, do you think if everyone knew that, Tesco would have invested millions of pounds and thousands of their suppliers would have invested thousands of pounds in carbon footprinting their products and trialling this? No. So you might say, of course it was stupid and we all knew it was going to fail. Well, they didn't. And single-handedly, as some retailers are inclined to do, tried to show that they could make it work. Essentially, this bit of research is trying to explain why it failed, and the focus here was on situational factors. So much of our academic research around consumer behaviour takes place from the comfort of your academic office, at the end of an online questionnaire that you send out to your uncle and your aunt on your network through Facebook, or you might buy a sample of 1,000 shoppers from some panel somewhere, but you'll do it from the comfort of your room, and they will answer the questions from the comfort of their rooms, which is a million miles away from when they're actually making decisions about what to buy. And you're nodding, so you get the point. So the focus here was, can we, because it was kind of starting to stall, was carbon labelling, can we do something to stimulate behaviour that will overcome these situational factors? Our conclusion was actually no. And when we sent, I'm not saying our report was the driver for Tesco's decision, but our report preceded Tesco's decision to stop the whole project. And at that time, there were other voices. There was other research saying this is too early. The consumers in their masses, who, don't forget, you're serving Tesco, you are not Waitrose, you are not Marks and Spencer, you are Tesco, 17 million households, of whom 16.5 don't care about the environment. What are you trying to do? Interesting. Traditionally, they would be following the consumer. That's how they make money, giving us what we want. Yeah, you get your coupons, or if you admit to having a club card, which of course you don't, but they give you what you want. In this case, they were, I believe, genuinely, but possibly naively, trying to do the right thing, taking a stand at the time when the Labour government was saying, this is important for the world. When Tony Blair was creating the impression around the planet that we were the Green Isle, at a time when food miles was on your agenda, very much so. So, without going into the detail of that conceptual framework, it's a pretty standard one. The theory of planned behaviour is behind most of these models, and what we're saying is there are factors which prevent people from doing what they planned to do. So, what did we do? So now we're into academic research mode now, aren't we? So we established some behaviour by looking at the data, and we did some focus groups, as you do, to find out why people do what they do. And then we looked at what I think was really quite interesting and innovative, which was an experimental intervention pre and in store, before we then measured the impact by looking at data, behaviour data, rather than asking people. And I'll tell you what it was. So, very quickly, because you can read for yourself if you're really interested in the detail. So going back to 2007, 2008, we looked at all of the products, and SKU is a product stock keeping unit, that had been carbon labelled. So not that many at this time. Almost certainly suppliers were held with a gun at their head. We need some volunteers, please, to come forward and have their products carbon labelled. All right then. And the majority were not interested. Could see no point in this whatsoever. But we looked at the analysis and we could see no evidence whatsoever of the carbon labelled products when they were launched with their new carbon label showing any change in differentiated response at all. So why were you doing this then? If there was no impact on consumers' behaviour, why were you doing this then? The focus groups, what do they tell us? What did you expect? They told us a fundamental lack of understanding of what carbon labelling is, and I'm sure that's still the same today. A low level of awareness of the carbon labels on products and the impact on purchasing behaviour, and no impact on, I don't know what these things are, and it has made no impact on my behaviour. So we're at the bottom of the triangle, behaviour change triangle, low levels of awareness, despite the fact this is the UK's biggest retailer, the second largest retailer in the world, trying to change our behaviours. And everyone at the side throwing mud at them. You shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be doing this. It's stupid. With lots of their own examples and alternative ways of changing behaviour. No, that's just anything that Tesco does must be bad because they're bad people. So focus on the young families. Why? So here's some interesting things for us to discuss should you wish to. Our view there was, this is research, young families amenable to change. You've got children pestering you, asking you questions. A much higher level of involvement in food purchasing behaviour. When you become parents, those of you who can remember, becoming a parent, suddenly your baskets change. interestingly, Tesco move you from the young adult segment to the young family segment when they see nappies appearing in your basket. Without even asking the question. Your coupons change because they now know you're a parent. And with it, lots of other things change too. Diverse range of constraints, however, barriers, budget squeeze, not much time, meal occasions, shopping missions, squeezing my visits in between, feeding, etc. And we're also reaching 2 generations at once. That's a nice add-on. We can be looking at the future generation of consumers while simultaneously looking at the parents. So pre-store work with primary schools to raise the issues with parents and children, in-store to raise the shopper awareness and facilitate low-carbon purchases. They were the 2 interventions. We selected stores around the country with the highest penetration of carbon-level products. It was already very low, so we went where it was the greatest. We're trying to stack up the odds in our favour. These are the stores where we can see most of these products are being purchased. So we come up with Carbon Footprint Week. This was our intervention. This is an academic researcher or a group of us with our PhD student designing an intervention around getting kids to think about, we wrote the packs, we sent them out to the schools, we dovetailed it with the curriculum, all of that stuff, and struggled massively with participation. So methodological issues here with stakeholder engagement. As those of you who have ever tried to do anything with schools, particularly primary schools, is don't. Or at least start, years before you want something to happen, and don't be surprised if it doesn't. And yet many of us assume that it will be just like that. They'll be so pleased to have this pack. They'll be so pleased to teach maths around carbon and geography around carbon. They'll say thank you and embrace it, and you must be a teacher because they don't. Right, so in the store we had staff wearing T-shirts. We had wobblers or whatever they're called, shelf talkers, flapping in front of people. Designed by us in partnership with the Carbon Trust and Tesco. Paid for by us to test whether we can make any impact. You know what the answer is, of course. We had footprints on the floors of these stores where most people, although there weren't very many, buying these products. And we had, did we have a green frog, or we had some green people, they were the T-shirts. What did we find out? We found from the teachers, they love the education pack. Good, there's scope there. We could do this better, probably. And it highlighted the complexity of the issues, despite a good level of enthusiasm, interest and understanding about environmental issues in general. 2 teachers commented on the children's bringing carbon-level products into school, suggesting the message had been passed on to parents. So it is very, I know it's trivial you might say, you've got to start somewhere. Small numbers, qualitative research, teachers liked it, some evidence that the kids will do this, because we all, we don't all, but some of us do ask questions of our kids about what they've done, and some kids want to tell mum and dad what they did. And then it's like, jeepers, I never heard of that. What do I do about that then? And what is more, the homework was, child goes to Tesco with mummy to look at the products to count up the carbon points. Oh, crikey. So that gets mum involved in the process. Some felt the trial stores were too far away for some parents, so homework was either not done or completed at a different Tesco store. You get the idea, yeah? So we've engaged with kids who engage with their parents, do some homework, raise awareness, drag mum to the supermarket, and suddenly she becomes enthusiastic about saving the planet and fills her basket with carbon-labeled products. And you might think, what a naive bunch of academics, what a stupid research design, no wonder it had no impact. Parents said, lots of them said they were aware of carbon labelling increased as a result of their child's involvement in the Footprint Week. And so here's results that kind of match that behavioural gap. Their awareness went up. 54% claimed their understanding improved. 28% claimed they'd purchased low carbon products as a direct result, and 13% said they would be likely to purchase carbon products in the future. Okay, so high level of awareness raised, translating into actually very little in terms of even claimed behaviour. We went to the stores and stopped them as they left the stores with these footprints and these green T-shirts and these shelf wobblers, and we said, what's going on in this store today? And a third said they noticed something different in the store, of which 19%. But the point is, you're not supposed to prompt them. Did you spot the carbon labels? Oh yes. We'd have got a much higher response rate. So you may think we really are stupid. If we'd asked the questions by prompting them, we'd have got much more impressive results that would have helped us publish in a higher journal, because the impact would have been so much greater and it would have been meaningless. When prompted, 17% claimed to have noticed more information about the carbon footprint, 20% claimed awareness of Tesco's carbon labelling, 10% claimed they had previously made purchase decisions. So again, talking to the shoppers, it went from not so high as the parents, still down to not very much. I'm going to skip this one, get to the last one, which was when we analysed the data for the individual stores, for every single carbon labelled product, they all looked like that. Pre-in-store intervention, post. What do you see? You just see noise. You see no discernible and absolutely zero statistically significant impact of that nonsense that we were engaged in with primary schools and supermarkets. And you'd be right to say that's because it was nonsense. Or you'd be right to say that's because it wasn't executed. And if we did it in a different way, it would have had a different outcome. And that could all be very, very true. We did what we did. We looked at what we could, that no one had looked at before. So we had a zillion of these charts for all of those stores, for all of those products. They all looked the same. Price promotions, price promotions, price promotions, and nothing at all different about the period in which this intervention was going on. The rest is history. Carbon labels are dead, which takes me to fair trade. Do you want to stop or can I go on? I can keep going. Right. So this is we're getting close to the end. Keep going. So this is a much more conventional piece of research. None of this joyous interacting with parents and children and designing interventions. This is much more bog standard deductive hypothesis testing, where we start off by saying we don't believe that these consumers that the Fair Trade Foundation are shouting about and other bits of civil society are boasting about are as ethical as they would have us believe. So we're going to do some research to see if we can find out just how ethical these consumers are and how much of their claimed behaviour is indeed driven by concerns or driven by ethical reasons. And we did this by taking the theory of planned behaviour and injecting a bit of motivational stuff. We looked at Schwartz's value types, and the hypothesis here was that if there was a behaviour driven by ethics, then the people that were characterised with high levels of universalism would be more inclined to buy fair trade products, and the selfish, self-directed individuals would be less inclined. Okay, so we've done the usual stuff. We researched the literature. That seemed a reasonable, broadly, that's what we did with this research. So, again, we looked at the dunnhumby data. We then did the usual survey of lots of people, and then we did 4 weeks of getting consumers. We sent them out prepaid envelopes, and we said, when you go shopping, keep your receipts, stuff them in the envelope, and send them to us. So we could check on what they were buying. Because these were people that said they were fair trade shoppers. And you know what the last slide is going to show you already. So, a couple of these dunnhumby, you came expecting to see some dunnhumby data, so I've got to show you some dunnhumby data. So, this is the sort of data that we looked at the early stage of this research. This is fair trade, so all fair trade purchasing products in Tesco. Yes, it's just Tesco. Yes, it's a point in time. Yes, it's just 1 year. It's still data that people aren't looking at. Nobody in this part of the world, fair trade, is looking at this data. The people that make products with a fair trade label, that's not true. Cadbury's will. And there's a big reason why fair trade sales have gone up, because brands have reached out for the label. Sales go up. What do you see? Headline news, UK consumers becoming increasingly ethical. No, they like chocolate from Cadbury's that happens to have a fair trade logo on it. They're oblivious to the ruddy fact, for Christ's sake. What's going on here? Oh, look, fair trade sales going up. And why is that then? Because, of course, this is at a time when we're mainstreaming. We're becoming ethically conscious. I mustn't go too far that way, must I? So, but why are the sales going up? This is data that tells us why. Because the average price of fair trade products in this fair mainstreaming world have gone up by 5%. Price-sensitive shoppers, they are not. It's those rich people from Farringdon that can afford fair trade products who do not reduce their expenditure. So the frequency of purchase falls only slightly as a result of this price change, which means the spend per customer goes up by 2.96%. Do we have more shoppers buying fair trade products? No. Down 5%. Despite the fact that Tesco's have chosen to stock it in 8% more stores. This ethical island gives them more of what they want, and they'll say, no, thank you very much. So what we'll do is we'll charge more for it. So if this was Waitrose data, yeah, we can crank that up a notch, yeah, because they're all going to buy it, aren't they? That's why they shop at Waitrose. So the point is, you look at that number from a distance and say, there you go, look, 30 million quid's worth. Second biggest market in the world, and it's going up. We must be more ethical. No, we're feeling rich. And the masses actually are buying less. How about Fair Trade Fortnight? We'll bang the drum and say, in Fair Trade Fortnight, so important is this, we're raising awareness. We would expect to see, would we not, sales of fair trade products increase, other things being equal. Fair Trade Fortnight, that's February 2010, February of each year. What happened? During that period, sales went down by 5%. We cut the prices by 2%, and units went down by 2%, which means we threw away 3% of spend. We chose to reduce the number of stores we're selling in at the time we're promoting these products, which meant that penetration went down. You'd all assume that if the movement was going to promote, we'd have loads more stores, with loads more people buying loads more stuff. We've promoted it, and not so. That's the kind of data you conveniently ignore if you were the organisation trying to prove the point that ethics matters. Skip. I must move on because you must be absolutely at your wit's end now. But the couple of, I am very close to the end now. I skipped that one because all it was showing, because you're going to get a view of the slides, I guess, if you want to, is how few people were buying across all of the fair trade categories. If I'm an ethical consumer, why would I just buy fair trade coffee? Why would I not buy fair trade bananas too? Why would I not buy other fair trade products if I'm truly buying this for ethical reasons? Answer, well, come up with your own, including why I didn't even know it was ethical, or it was the cheapest at the time. It was promoted. So this cross-shopping analysis enables you to find out just how deep a consumer shops across a category. And we said, look, for God's sake, all of this growth is about two things. How many people can access the product, distribution, and how much the price is. Because it actually is rich people that buy fair trade products. Forget this mainstreaming lark, because it's not true. And indeed, what do you get? We looked at, this is a multiple regression equation where we've got sales of fair trade products as a function of the price and distribution. And there's a positive significant coefficient on the number of stores stocked, and there's a positive negative coefficient on the price. Make something more available and increase the price, and those two things have the effects, as you'd expect, on demand, and will explain 72% of the variation in fair trade sales. Get that? So I see nothing here to do anything with ethics. It's just, what's the price, what's the distribution? Cut the price, increase distribution. In theory, you should sell more stuff. Although in Fair Trade Fortnight, the opposite occurred. You might say in Fair Trade Fortnight, everyone shopped at farmers markets and other places, and that's why Tesco sales went down, quite possibly. And in the lifestyles and the life stages, in case we don't believe that stuff around income, this is, again, we did some paired t-tests on the average sales for different shopper segments. We know who they are from their club card. Yep. What is this showing? It's showing significant differences between the upmarket shopper, the mid-market shopper, and the price-sensitive shopper. with the upmarket shopper having a significantly higher share of the market than the cheaper ones, than the downmarket shopper. And here you've got life stage segments. I've just shown them in two different ways because not everyone wants to see the numbers. It's exactly the same test. So fair trade appealing to younger and older families, kind of backing up our approach by looking at younger families for the carbon labor product. Medium appeal to older adults, and the least appeal to pensioners and younger adults. The point is, these segments have got different buttons to press if you want to change their behaviour. So we had those hypotheses about Schwartz's values that you'd expect to influence purchasing behaviour. So self-direction, selfish people, negative effect on attitudes towards fair trade, right? I care about me, I don't care about you, I'm less inclined to buy fair trade products. That was it for the survey, yep. I care about the world, I'm more likely to buy fair trade products. Got it? And what did we find? We found, another interesting thing here, doubtless a statistical quirk. So how many of those are there in the research that drives behaviour or policy making? We found a significant, but bloody hell, positive effect. That wasn't supposed to happen. So a significant relationship, but it's the wrong sign. Why would you have a self-directed individual more inclined to buy fair trade products? You might know, because you're experts in this. I don't. We couldn't work that one out, so we just left it as interesting. We accepted this one, so yes, that was good. So at least there was some evidence that the universalist consumers were more inclined to buy fair trade products. We rejected that hypothesis. Self-direction has a positive effect on perceived behavioural control. I am the boss, I have control. Well, no support for that whatsoever. And there's this neutralisation theory that says, well, I am the boss, but actually when it comes to saving those poor people in Ethiopia, my chocolate bar will make no difference. I don't think I'll bother. We rejected this hypothesis, we accepted that one. The point is, there is the usual mixture of acceptance and rejection, not all of which accepts or otherwise the underlying assumptions. And the very last slide before I get to my conclusions. When we looked at the till receipts of the, I don't know how many it was, 48 shoppers that were sad enough to stuff their till receipts in an envelope for 4 weeks and send them to us, what did we discover? They claimed £132 of expenditure on fair trade products. They actually spent 12 quid. The minimum spending value they said was 14, whereas actually it was £1.39. The maximum spending value they said was 60 quid. I'm a fair trade freak, when actually it was £2.87. We read it from their till receipts. We didn't ask them any questions. That's a bit like the Morris Minor version of, not even that, it's the dog and pony version of Dunnhumby, where we've got 40 till receipts and we've gone through each one. So, there you are, a journey of madness and mayhem. You're all now exhausted, as am I. That's what's going to happen, because the world is coming to an end and we cannot stop it. But we can have fun trying. So the conclusions are, assumptions are the mother of all cock-ups. Looking at markets in aggregate, which I feel we are all guilty of. Policymakers dreadfully guilty at looking at aggregate market data. We teach our consumers to feel, our students to feel comfortable with averages, where all the activity, the interesting stuff, is at the tail end of the distribution, which we discount, often remove from the analysis. Outliers that will take us from the norm. So, blind to the reality, in quotes, and the heterogeneity of behaviour. By this time, like you, most of my students are asleep. They've spent most of the time tweeting their friends about this mad lecture they're having. Here we've got Cook, haven't we? Who, until he discovered Tasmania, until that time, all the swans were white. It took just one black swan. Nicholas Tyler's book, I recommend it to anybody if you haven't read it, The Black Swan. It's a fantastic read. He's a bit of an arrogant bugger, having made his fortune as a trader in New York. But what he says is, we're all too cosy. He slags off the economists like mad. He slags off the historians like mad because they believe they can predict the future based on the past. And how foolish is that? Think about your past. For Christ's sake, how different is today to what it was then? How on earth do we think we can inform our future planning based on what was happening yesterday, let alone 10 years ago? So, yeah, the Black Swan, I think it's changed, has a massive impact on the way I look at things now, and that's why it's there. organisations, wherever you are in the food chain, you must change the way, or they must change the way they think. This might be a farmer seeking retribution on a bullying supermarket. That's going to hurt in a very unethical way that poor beast that retailer is riding. Take decisions and behave. Consumer insight is an essential, and I really believe, missing ingredient, but having it alone will not give us the solution, because once you see the reality of the attitude-behaviour gap, that now requires a fundamental change in the way we design and implement policies to change behaviour. My favourite slide that I stole from dunnhumby, and everyone needs to look more closely, and academics included. We filter stuff out to get the significant result that will get us published in that journal. It's shocking. We should be hung up. Listen more carefully. I've got big ears, which means I'm a good listener. I might not always make sense of it. And then speak more clearly with a comma that shouldn't be there to the people who want to hear different things. Thank you for putting up with me.
Hi, my name is Wendy Fogarty. I work as an independent sustainable food and farming consultant. Just one quick question before I ask mine. Did you say 1 in 5 Tesco's customers are price sensitive? That's lower than I thought.
Yeah,
is there
by their own, I shouldn't be saying this, but by their own segmentation of what people put in their shopping baskets, only 1 in 5 are fundamentally driven by the price of the product. So why would there be shops, Tesco stores, like everyone else's stores, full of discounts? Because they're full of Homer Simpsons buying and selling those products. Sorry, go on.
No, my question's really politically incorrect, and it doesn't actually align with my own values, but it's something that's in my mind. I'm Australian, and when I grew up, health system was pretty much like the NHS is here, so it was still fair and free. In Australia, it's no longer free. And Australia, to a certain extent, seems to have held its value perception for food marginally more. I've lived here now for 20 years, and I have always struggled with the fact that you can get a lot of free medication, like antibiotics, etc., whereas in Australia, you always had to pay for those, and it was income indexed. You see what I mean? And I'm wondering if there's a correlation between the fact that we've got a free and generous health system. Does that relate in any way to our value with food? It's just something that's been bubbling away, and I don't know if there's anything that you're aware of in research, but are we taking for granted the 2 most precious things? Because we can.
That's a very big philosophical question.
It is, yeah. Ooh, yeah.
Well, maybe that's where that conversation goes, actually.
Yeah. Both are broken, aren't they? Our food system is no less broken than our health service. We don't value our health. Interesting. So what you're saying is that that opportunistic short-term policy-making strategy translates into life really is too short. I will eat my donuts, thank you very much. I will pay not very much for my food, so I can go and drink pints of beer and I can smoke lots of stuff and live unhealthy lives.
Not even that, but if you have to pay for something which is at the moment quite freely available, does that not change your readiness to pay for other things like, better quality food? I mean, I know this is
if we had to pay for our health, then would we be less inclined to become obese if we thought we might have to pay for the treatment to say...
And certainly not all of our health. I'm talking about some medications, obviously index, as I said, it's loaded, but I just can't help but wonder if there's a correlation.
Well, have a look at the health research. The thing that comes to mind now is the research around health labelling, and the people that respond most directly and positively to health claims are the people that have just come from the Wellman clinic and have got a cholesterol problem, or have a mother or an uncle which has had a heart attack. If you have the evidence that is you've got 6 months to live, or your family has a gene that means you're going to get this disease, you're more inclined to change your behaviour. If you don't, in other words, the masses, then even healthy labelling doesn't seem to be anything like as effective as you think it would be. The sinking ship sinking. As I abuse my time.
Hi, I have two questions and comments. When Tim was, I'm sorry, I'm Carlos González Fisher. I'm currently independent, but I'm an ecologist interested in food.
An ecologist.
Yes, interested in sustainable food consumption and production. So when we talk about choices, usually when you talk about sustainability, the bigger impact you have is what sort of what products are you consuming, and not exactly what variant of the same products. I don't know if you, if I'm making myself clear. For example,
sure.
One thing is to choose sugar brand A over sugar brand B, and the other one is how much sugar do you eat. And I was wondering, do you have some research on that, choosing one product over the other one instead of just different sorts of the same product? And the second comment is about that behavior, intention behavior gap, that difference. A lot of the times that's maintained on purpose, and there's a lot of invested interest in maintaining that. And again, if you had any reflections on that.
Well, I agree with you. So I think I said that at the beginning, that much of the fragility of the food system, I believe, is fixable, except that there are too many vested interests in not fixing it. So absolutely do I agree that there are significant numbers of food manufacturers who have got no interest in getting significant numbers of consumers changing their preferences before they are able to meet their needs. And don't forget, they employ lots of people. So the food industry, so equally, it's not necessarily, and that's the whole complexity thing. So if you fix the food problem by removing sugar from our diet, how many jobs will that cost? Not just in this country, but in other parts of the world, which is why you can't look at it in isolation. Unless you end up concluding that if you don't look at it in isolation, you just go round and round in circles.
We have a briefing paper coming out from the Food Research Collaboration about exactly
that issue.
About sugar.
There you are. That's a good one to watch. The brand switching one, no, we haven't. The answer is we could. Again, the data exists. Have we done any research specifically on brand switching within a category away from what you might classify as less sustainable towards more sustainable variants of that product, a bit like the Tate & Lyle. So if there were two sugar brands and one's gone fair trade, then could we look to see whether that's had any impact on their behaviour? The answer is yes, we could, and our hypothesis would be that it won't have had any impact at all. That they're doing it for some other reason. It might be that their brand manager says we need to protect our brand, but I would imagine the purchasers of Tate & Lyle sugar are oblivious to the fact that it's now fair trade sugar. But we could.
Yeah.
Always happy to share data with people that have got another hypothesis to test, if that's what you want to do.
No, it was more.
But we haven't done it ourselves.
Thinking about more holistic change of diets, for example, a lot of the advice goes to move away from animal products to vegetable products, and those sorts of comparisons are more difficult to make because.
But also because that's entirely predictive. Then, the argument is we should be moving away from this and towards that for all of these reasons. And now you're back into the behaviour change challenges. Well, who says I can't eat my T-bone steak? I like my steak, thank you. So why am I going to change? Thank you very much. What's the problem here?
John Kaiser from the Carbon Trust.
From?
John Kaiser from the Carbon Trust.
Right.
Aha. So
tell us the truth, or tell me, yes, put me right.
No, we're going to take you outside later.
That's good.
No, I really welcomed your positive take on Tesco's project, which is unusual and very refreshing, because I basically spent the first 4 years of my career in the environmental sector working on that programme, and it's very frustrating from an internal perspective to see how people responded so negatively to something that was quite ambitious.
Yeah.
And as you say at the start, we didn't know what was going to happen.
No.
So they should be congratulated, I think, at least trying it. And it's also interesting that the management team in the climate change department changed quite significantly during the programme and after it ended. So there's an interesting, interesting internal story about how that whole thing worked,
which the world doesn't see at all.
No, and I know it probably Also, one question.
No.
Come and talk to us to find out what we're doing now, because there's a lot of commonality, I think, in our thinking in parallel. that's happened in terms of labelling and carbon footprinting and other things. The main question I have is about your attitude to choice editing, which I found a bit confusing because it sounded very contradictory with other things that you've been talking about.
Possibly, yeah.
And so you mentioned earlier about the benefit of creating transparency and collaboration in supply chains.
Yeah.
I don't see how on earth that is compatible with outside choice editing by governments. It doesn't seem to be in any way related at all.
Well, choice editing, sorry to interrupt, but choice editing by companies.
Well, in either sense, choice editing by a company or by outside people doesn't seem to fit with a collaborative, transparent supply chain. So I can't see how those two things work and would end up in the same place.
Yeah.
I don't know how you would decide about what choices to edit because it's highly complicated. And also you mentioned when you were talking with Tim about you would like consumers to learn over the next 20 years how to engage properly with this discussion. How is that going to happen? Through choice editing, because they're not going to see any of the issues that they need to learn about.
That's interesting. I mean, my thoughts, and other people have thoughts too. My own take on choice editing there was it was a temporal thing, and I'm seeing it as a result of market failure. So I'm seeing government as choice editing. They haven't got the balls to do it, and they wouldn't want to, and that's their problem, or it's our problem because they won't. I struggle to see why an individual retailer or chain would choice edit in a world where we're brought up to believe that choices are good, more is better, and after all, I'm grown up enough to make my own thank you. So my argument was, in the short term, choice editing is necessary because otherwise I will keep on eating the donuts. If you choice edit the donuts away from me for long enough, I will lose the taste for them, I will start to feel and look better, and sure enough, I won't ask for them back. So that point about how would you know which ones to take away, well, that's going to be driven by the nutritionists, the environmentalists, the ecologists saying, and you might say that's going to be a hard conversation to have, but in the same way that we had nutritionists tell us what the least healthy products in the Coventry Rico Arena store was, at least you've got voices in the room that can say, well, a sustainable shelf of breakfast cereals would have this kind of these variants, which means you've got 20, 30, 40 products to remove. But what's interesting, I mean, this is fascinating, and no doubt Tim will chip in a second. You must be doing a lot of work in this area. What's really interesting is the knock-on effect of choice editing is the space that it creates. So, shelves have expanded to accommodate more brands, many of which might be unsustainable. Take them out. So you could just increase the allocation to the existing products, or you've now created space for some new ones that don't even yet get a look in. So I saw choice editing, I see choice editing as an implication of market failure and the job of government. But Tim, you might have a different view about who might do the choice editing.
Since you're asking a question to me, I think you've put it absolutely spot on. That's exactly what goes on. And I think we haven't, in policy terms, people haven't taken choice editing seriously enough. They assume, policy people assume governments are going to do it, but governments won't. And actually, companies are doing it, but are nervous about doing it for the ends that is going to alter the price structures. So I think it's a mess.
Right.
So I'm with Andy. Did you just call that very quick? But I think it's a failure of institution.
Yes, an institutional failure.
This is a problem with institutions.
How many votes would you win in the next election if someone said, we're going to, of course, it's a right loser, isn't it?
Just very, very quickly, there's a fundamental problem with choice editing in the sense that a lot of people, and I class Tim in this, would take things away, which is anti-business in the sense that a lot of businesses that are currently bad are trying to improve. Yeah. And that is a fundamental issue that needs to be considered and rewarded. And it's too simplistic to say, remove this, remove that. You need to remove, reward and change, which gets you back to supply chains. And
but it also gets you back to planned behaviour, right? It comes back to the theory of planned behaviour, and I did say at the beginning that model applies to every stakeholder in the chain. So if you have a plan for changing your product range to make it more sustainable, that puts you in a different space to if you're oblivious to the need to change your product range or are resisting that change. Yeah. So when we're saying choice editing, I don't think we're arguing that overnight or within the next 3 months, the faces of our retail shelves are, suddenly transformed. I mean, it's not going to happen, is it? But if it did, there'd be a process of consultation and negotiation and presumably regulation that will take God knows how many months, if not years, which means that the government is saying, we're getting serious about this, and if by the time this regulation gets through, if you haven't sorted this out, then we will come into these categories and we'll sort them out for you. That's perfectly doable. That gives you 2 years of notice, for goodness sake. Only at the moment, who's going to make it happen?
One of the things I really liked I liked a lot that you said, but one of the things I really liked that you were saying, we've got to think long term and short term. At the moment, we vacillate between them.
We do.
Do you want to come in now and then pass it to Lindy in front of you?
My name's Nessie Reid. I'm from This Is Rubbish, which is a food waste charity, as the name suggests.
Not a subtitle for this seminar.
No, not at all. I'm not sure which supermarket, but...
Sorry.
Yeah. I'm not sure which supermarket, but a supermarket recently said that they only account for 1.3% of supermarket waste. I don't know if anyone knows which supermarket that was. But what we're noticing and what we've just been given a nice little chunk of money from Esme Fairbairn to do a food waste audit, to get a supermarket to be a food waste champion. And supermarkets often deflect and divert the responsibility of what happens at the producer level. So my first question is, to what extent should what onus lies on supermarkets to take responsibility for food waste? And in relation to your work, a lot of the time it's put on to consumers as the main... victims or the main perpetrators of responsibility for food waste. Yeah. And then the second question is the role of arts. I'm an artist in residence with an organisation called Cape Farewell, and it's a project to raise awareness about the situation of dairy farming in the UK. So I'm going to probably, for this exhibition, will live with a cow in a space for 10 days in a glass case and show the relationship between cow to milk to production to homogenisation. So it's going to be very messy, but that's what I want to put across. So there'll be...
Dad was a pig farmer.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So if you hear of any cows who want to come with me, then it's going to be in Bristol at the end of the year as part of the Green Capital. So it's about showing... My question to you on that is... I want to ask the question of how is it that milk is cheaper than bottled water? So 89 pence in Asda for 4 pints of milk. And listening on Farming Today the other day, someone said, if I knew what farmers went through in this country to get milk that cheap, I would pay an extra 15p. And the whole argument of, but the single mother with 4 children, she's not going to want to spend an extra 10p on milk. If she understood, farmers, I don't need to tell all of you farmers, the levels of suicide. The farmers I'm working with at the moment, they have all had nervous breakdowns. And it's so hard sometimes working with them because they're just incredibly, Anyway, so my second question is, what role can the arts and can... your average...
I've got to say in his defence, there's about 42 questions.
Yeah, there is, sorry. So how to get... Very good. I don't want to be too prescriptive and too lecturing in the exhibition, but really to open up the question and say, do you realise what's in your milk? And you don't have to answer that question now because it's just...
No.
But if anyone else has any thoughts on that, let me know.
Look, I think it sounds like you... I'll try. I'll just do what everyone does and pick the bits that I understand. So it sounds like you'll be very good at it because the way you articulated the story. I suppose the only comment I would make is, and this is not. I'm not saying this, and it might sound patronising. It's not meant to be patronising, but I can think of lots of companies. No doubt you can too, Tim, and individuals, organisations that have great ideas like yours that do fantastic things, as you will do, and gain media attention for 5 minutes. But the connecting up of the rest of the dots thereafter, all you've done is for 2 minutes, you've raised awareness. You've got someone to stop eating their porridge in the morning and look at you on breakfast TV or listen to you on Radio 4 and think, oh, that looks interesting. They might go to your tweet or whatever you do. But then what? And arguably one of the challenges, isn't it, that there are there are dozens of organisations like yours with a fantastic passion, heart, plan, but joining up the dots is not something that features very highly on agendas like your organisation. And I shouldn't say that because I don't know what your organisation's agenda is. But
let me push your question forward.
Yeah.
I'll pick up one bit. One of the key bits that Nessie was asking there was, if I did know, if I did know what went into that milk, wouldn't I be prepared to pay more for it, was what you said. Yeah. But what Andy's been saying is it makes no difference.
No, it does. Quite right. And go back. I was going to ask. That was the other one I was going to have a go at, which is, think about when did we used to have retail price maintenance? There was a time when
it was abolished in 1975.
75, right? So there was a time when government said this is what you should charge for stuff, right? Because what
you all know that?
Retail price. Some people are old enough.
Retail price maintenance. Allowed manufacturers to set up.
Yeah.
Dairy farmers were safe.
Well, at least there's another agenda for driving the price, right? And which means we can't use price alone to compete, because if milk's a lost leader, the trouble is ASDA might pay for that. The ultimate issue that often gets missed is that much of the promotions that ASDA run, they finance. So they'll take a hit in their margin to finance cheap milk. But the trouble is, if all of the other retailers see cheap milk in ASDA, they say to their suppliers, you've got to match ASDA's milk price. But they're not prepared to pay for that. So then those suppliers have to sacrifice their margin, they therefore don't invest, just to match. So the behaviour of one retailer in isolation causes all this knock-on behaviour, which is an argument for market regulation.
And I think sometimes naming and shaming from civil society seems to be one of the most powerful campaigns.
No, and listen to his answer before you posed your 14th question.
14th question.
Which I was, she's a campaigner.
Yeah, good.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
He said, they're going to take no difference.
Yeah.
I'll add to your question again. I was in a meeting in DEFRA 2 weeks ago where we were talking about milk. No names, no petrol, but very large company paying farmers, and these milk farmers, 29p, whereas next door to them were being paid 21p. And people moving over, companies moving over to only guaranteeing the price for 3 months. Yes. Not even a year, but to 3 months. Well, do you know how cows, they take 9 months out of pregnancy, and it's a 3-year cycle.
Madness.
This isn't something about consumer behaviour.
Not at all. Not absolutely. Yeah, well, yes. And that's equally, I've already said it, and I'm going to say it again, telling consumers, even getting them to listen to you, good luck, right? They will listen to you in your stimulating bubble where you're trying to draw people's attention. But that's why I did say this does start. I mean, it's an old story, isn't it? It does start with generations of learning, relearning, and engagement in debate about where our food comes from and why these things matter. There is no debate about this at the moment. It's just people saying, you asking the question, why is the milk price so low? Assumption, retailers exploiting their power, squeezing intermediaries, causing farmers to have suicide. And yes, next question.
Exactly.
Don't let the market to fail that one.
There's one more at the back. We're going to have to wrap up shortly, by the way.
Thank God.
This is fantastic.
So I'm Lindy Sharp, and I'm here at the Centre for Food Policy. And I had one quick comment and then 2 questions. The quick comment was on the carbon footprinting. I just finished working on a research project here at City on carbon, on a version of life cycle footprinting, which was funded by the EU and one of several. So it seems as if that concern, perhaps having failed in the private sector, has swum into the public sector where it's being funded and attempting to, and they say a motive is to get supply chain participants to be aware of their behaviour and improve themselves. Benchmark. Anyway, so the questions were, I'm not an economist. I've never actually met anybody who believed in free. That's probably how far we are from your students. I've never met anybody here who believed in free markets or the rationality of markets. Is there a kind of formula for a general
rule of thumb for knowing how much in the food supply, across the food supply, how important cost is in determining price, just in general?
Do you want to answer that first?
I'm still trying to work out precisely when you're saying, because when you're saying in general,
in food. I mean,
I struggle with that.
Big a question.
Well, I struggle with in general because straight away you fall into the trap that food is food, and a beefsteak is the same as a pint of milk. So how much is cost? Well, if something costs 20, whatever the retail price is, 20 pence, then it's all cost for Christ's sake. Because how much value can there be added to a pint of milk that's being sold for next to nothing? So there are commodities. Sorry, the general rule of thumb is this, isn't it? Commodities, it's all cost because there is no added value in a commodity. It's volume, and hardly any profit. Whereas in differentiated products, you see the departure from the cost and the selling price is from this value that we create in a myriad of ways, either real or increasingly perceived.
So it would be possible, for example, for the supermarket to say, we will reduce the price, not to talk to the consumer about why they were doing this, we will reduce the price of all of our carbon label product by 10%. And then your spikes would be related to
they could
price, but also carbon.
But I'm happy to invite someone that should learn more about this from the Carbon Trust than I would. Of course, the interesting argument there is if you've invested in carbon footprinting, in the process you would have found out ways in which you can reduce that, which will cut your costs. And the same argument I could use for the dairy farmers who for years in this country have argued we are the most efficient dairy farmers in Europe. When the abolition of quotas comes, we expect to get more of it. That's because they're the most efficient. They're asking for prices to fall by arguing that they are the most efficient converters of inputs to output in the form of milk. So they're the victims of their own success. If you're making a commodity, whether it's a glass of milk or a glass of Chardonnay or something much posher, then you are always going to be a price taker. And the biggest problem for me with primary production is the distribution of cost. So you've got people up here for whom it costs 40 pence a litre, and you've got people here for whom the cost is 4 pence a litre. So for every farmer that's committing suicide, you've still got farmers, dairy farmers, who are making a reasonable return on their investment. They own the land. Yes. And because consumers... Go on.
Or if they're entirely self-contained.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, it doesn't have to be huge.
At this meeting, I was there was someone who had, don't quote me, but it was something like 120 cows.
Right.
I mean, the guy with 3,000 cows laughed.
Yes,
but he was surviving.
Yeah.
And got two kids being paid.
But
different model.
Yes.
Linda,
sorry, go on. Yeah.
Second question, completely unrelated. Right. I suppose the point of that was that if prices are artificial, that makes it more difficult for people to understand what's going on. You know, if we perceive prices as being very artificial, not related to costs, then this milk thing, that's perplexing for people to make decisions. My other question is completely unrelated. I've always wondered this: why doesn't Tesco make its archive? Why doesn't it anonymise enough to make this data available to everybody and all the others as well? I mean, it's such a resource. It must have bearing on health policy, diet policy, good data. Make it free.
Well, to be honest with you, a short answer is I suspect not enough people have tried enough to get it from them. If you put a decent argument for what good you could do with their data, again, we assume, they would never give it to us. We then ask them, you can never talk to them. And it's this Tesco creature. So people don't. And therefore, Shy Bairn's getting out. They were very happy for me to see me using that data in that way to target vulnerable people to help them improve their diets. They were delighted in the same way that they're delighted with the other research that... Pardon? Yes, indeed.
Well, they've made it... I thought that was very interesting because they've made that one of their 3 Tesco and Society commitments, haven't they?
Yes.
To reduce obesity. So they're desperate for that knowledge. So it's probably... the data will be more available.
Now, back to your point, finding the person in Tesco that has the authority to say, yes, you can have. That's bloody hard, right? Because it's a huge organisation. The lines of responsibility are all over the place, so it's not easy. It's really, 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 really hard. It took me 2 years to get access to it. Once you're in and you can start the ball rolling, like the Carbon Trust did with Tesco at that time. Once you were in, you were their bedfellows. You were off, weren't you? For a period, you could do what you like until, well, within reason. Yeah, I mean they were working very closely with you, but. Again, so I don't assume, why would they archive it? Look, they're a commercial company, they got 3,000 stores. In 1994 they had 1,500. The world has changed. For a Nestle or a Tesco, food purchasing behaviour 10 years ago is completely and utterly irrelevant. And they've got 17 million baskets coming through every week. How big's the warehouse got to be to store it? If someone had the foresight 10 years ago to say, could we build a warehouse and take your anonymised data that you don't need anymore, then why wouldn't they? They might charge you for it, but it has no commercial value. So it's gone. You can't get it.
Oh, it's gone?
It's gone. They erase it. To all intents, it's like having a hard disk that's erased. 2 years. You've got weekly data for 2 years. You might get some aggregated data going back 10 years, but then it's like, yeah, exactly. But then it's no better than we've already got. But ask the question and think about what would the reason be for Tesco to say to somebody, can you please make this data available? Right now.
The slogan is using scale for good, and their 2013 report
of course.
called Tesco for Society.
And what better time when a beast is terribly wounded? It's got, imagine, it's like a beast, isn't it? And they've got people biting chunks out of this poor wretched beast. The beast is not going to die, but right now it's very, very wounded. And if it's got people going to them saying, we want to help you heal your wounds, and it will cost you nothing, and we'll even pay you. What would it cost to get someone to do the downloading? And it might be some horrendous fee, but that fee could make all the difference if what it does is shine a light on something that you didn't see before. So don't assume you can't get it.
Very, very good. Good response to your thoughts on Lindy. Last question.
Well, Jeff Tansey, currently chairing the Fabian Commission on
Author
Food
of.
Quality,
Yeah.
author of the food
Indeed.
system and other things.
Fount of all. Sorry, yes, carry on.
Questions and comments. First of all, would it have made much difference, do you think, if you'd been looking at data from other retailers? Because obviously you've got a particular demographic in the thing.
Yes.
Yes.
Answer yes.
But you obviously don't know what it is.
I think retailers are heterogeneous in the same way that consumers are. You could easily have got different results. I think the results would have been worse for Tesco, for Asda, Morrison's and the discounters. You might have got slightly better results for Sainsbury's, and you might have got very different and positive results with Waitrose and M&S.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons.
When you talked about regulation, what was it? One of the things we've actually seen is real regulatory capture by the powerful players in the last 20 years, especially if you look at the intellectual property rules, which I did, because they are actually setting the rules that suit them and via government. So there's an issue about the power dynamics of this are really important, and that's kind of missing. You talked about, I thought that slide you put on the yoghurt was interesting because it raises an issue that's been drawn to our attention. When you're promoting products, it isn't necessarily the product that benefits, it's the category. And what you saw was shifting within the category, but the category was being bought, and that was quite an interesting one. Fair trade, what's the customer perception of fair trade? That it's fair along the system, or because it isn't, clearly? And companies are making money by increasing the margins on it. And this is a real danger for the Fair Trade Foundation when people really understand that. I was at International Food and Drink Exhibition a few years ago talking to a supplier who'd got a fair trade product which he recommended, sold at 79p. When he sold it into a large supermarket, they said, oh no, we can make much more. They marketed it at 150. So the fair trade product that you purchase is not fair all the way through the system. It's only the only thing the Fair Trade Foundation is saying is the producer gets better deals at the far end. Yes. But there's a real challenge, I think, in the whole fair trade system at the moment when people...
And Andy, I'm sure you know the SOAS report, that was a big report from SOAS that in the ESRC seminar series we're running that are on the Food Research Collaboration website. The first one at Essex, we had a presentation from that SOAS report funded by DFID, two-year inquiry into fair trade. It was actually going one step beyond what Jeff Tansey has just said, was saying that actually not enough money even does get down to the primary producers.
Yeah,
kind of opening up.
Yes.
Your shared value model.
Yes.
Actually has a different translation if one really takes fair trade.
Yeah, and actually we shouldn't talk about value, we should talk about where can you make profit through the system and how can you turn cheap things into more expensive things very often. If you put down the price of milk on your promotion, it's very likely you've increased the margin or a half penny or a penny here on other products so that you balance out across your 30 to 50,000 items that you may be selling. Two general points. History matters. I don't think I really dislike the way you kind of dismissed history. It's not that in terms of predictive nature, look back and we'll be able to tell what the future is. But if we don't understand some of the how we've responded to crises and processes, we're likely to respond in equally destructive but different ways when they come up again. And the final point is the bigger issue is, and I take issue with you, why shouldn't I eat my steak or whatever? The big issue for us in Europe is, and Britain is we've assumed we can eat what we want, when we want, from wherever we want. This is not a tenable position for the 21st century. And so it's about getting real about that. And the supply chain that you're talking about, the supermarkets have this big offer, is the way they saw the way of making money 20, 30, 40 years ago was extending the product range, was extending the seasons, going beyond seasonality, etc., etc. All of the things which we are now having to rethink for climate change reasons, for equity reasons, for geopolitics reasons. So that is an issue I'd like, do you see anyone wanting to start to grapple with that or still have the illusion that we can just keep on going in the way we've been doing?
That is briefly.
Very briefly. Just sort it out, please. I
think I agree with much of the observations there. I'm struggling to remember some of the comments. The point about history, yes. So I do purely from. I take your point absolutely that the lessons learned from history we shouldn't ignore. I was emphasising very much predicting the future based on the past is crazy. But understanding that the way we dealt with this problem of salmonella chickens or BSE and whatever it might be, or looking back in history about the mistakes that we've made, that's important because in the same way that we have Remembrance Sunday, we might not commit ridiculous crimes of this kind again in the future. So I'd have to take a step back or acknowledge that dismissing things in that way. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, so that's my creating the enabling environment. That's for me. That's part of that is delivering consistently. So what they're saying is, well, we're just auditors. We certify the process, and our bit of the promise is here. The rest is not our concern. Well, then you're not doing the job properly, and you're leaving it to consumers to work that out. Luckily for you, they don't care enough to bother, so you're left with the 5% who are rich enough to pay more for it, which is why they're still treating it as a premium product. If they did it properly, then a bit like saying, on a bottle of milk, the farmer, it cost this much to milk the cow, he got this much, and each bit in the chain, if that was put on the back of the bottle, I still don't think that many people would care, but at least it does make it unequivocally transparent. This is why we arrived at this pence per litre.